Written and directed by Jack Cox, we are talking The Stickman's Hollow, and this is a 2024 found footage movie. Now, interestingly, this is kind of a movie that's almost an anthology, but it isn't, is the best way I'd describe it. It actually is split up into chapters, each of which focus on a kind of different set of characters, but are connected to the same chain of events. So they do it kind of makes sense and they do fit together. But initially, especially the first two seem particularly sort of disconnected. So the first one is about this family that are going on a kind of like a fishing trip in the woods. And we're introduced to a couple of characters who will come up again in the kind of the last segment, who relate to this family, and then with this one there is a strange noises in the woods, and inevitably something kind of happens. And then the second one is kind of like a possession, exorcism style movie, which at first doesn't really appear to have anything to do with the first kind of section, and then we have a very brief third one, which is kind of like takes place in the 90s, and then the fourth one is effectively a almost like a follow-on from the first movie, but it actually kind of ties it all together, and that has a couple of characters that we had seen in the first section. So it sort of is a anthology in a way, but they are all connected and are almost sort of their own sort of story. So let's discuss. Now, I've got to say, although this movie I do think ends up having a little bit of a problem where it feels a little bit derivative of, say, like the Blair Witch and other kind of like folk horror style found footage movie, I do think this movie was still very engaging. I think having this kind of quasi anthology feel to it, but still having these sort of short films interconnected and integral into the kind of the overall story, makes for gives the movie some variety, but also has an interesting arc. So I think the movie has almost the best of both worlds in a way, where you feel like there is definitely a sort of an overreaching story, but you are seeing different corners of that sort of story that involve sort of different characters. And I gotta say, it's to me the kind of the second, which is the possession sort of style one, was the strongest. A genuinely quite kind of scary possession sort of style segment was particularly the strong. An effective movie in its own right to a degree, with I think I would say the strongest performances overall. But each movie was quite sort of, or each section of the movie was in its own right still relatively sort of strong. Dealing with found footage, but having decent sort of quality cameras so we can kind of see what's kind of going on. Minimal sort of fake disruption and things like this. Some reasonable kind of VFX in regards to what you are sort of seeing on screen, and I think the VFX are done with some sort of restraint, where you don't see a huge amount of what is going on, but you see enough that you understand that it's something supernatural, something other than human to a degree. You see enough, I think, to keep you satisfied, but they keep it shrouded in enough mystery where you're kind of wondering about what's the kind of like the, there has that air of mystery about it to a degree. So I thought that was actually kind of pretty well handled. I think the way these stories are interconnected, with the exception of the third one, which I've got to say, which is a very short one, I didn't really feel that really added anything to the actual story, and to me was a little bit of an outlier. It's so short, I didn't really feel like it you could have taken it out and it wouldn't have made a blind bit of difference to the actual film itself. And I kind of failed to see the connection to that one. But to be honest, it's such a short, section. It doesn't really affect the overall experience. But all three of them, I think, had an interesting kind of connectivity. Particularly the first two and the last one, you kind of felt, fit together to make a kind of a coherent story for the most part. And like I say, even though I think this movie is arguably a little bit derivative, I still think the story is enough to kind of keep you interested to kind of go with the flow and wanting to know kind of what happens, and was a film where you are engaged enough. You're not feeling like you kind of want to check your phone. Do I have any critiques? Relatively minor critiques, but let me kind of run through them. The third section, which is as I've mentioned, I think it's called like the entity or the monster or something like that, is throwaway. It didn't even need to be in there if you ask me. I didn't really understand that section, I have to say. It feels quite out of place. It's taking place in the 90s. And I have to say, I didn't really get what it was trying to say. But it's so short and it is so disconnected from the other three stories, I don't think it really matters. And like I said, you could take it out and I don't think you would have any less of a viewing experience how it connects to the other three. So there's that. Yes, it maybe skirts a little bit too close to Blair Witch with the stickmen and all the rest of it. I guess that is, folk horror iconography, but you could arguably say it's maybe giving you too many Blair Witch vibes. So outside of that, I do have a couple of other critiques. The first section of the story, which is based on this family, this to me had the weakest acting, particularly from our male, who, and I'm not exaggerating here, comes across like Ned Flanders from The Simpsons. Not in the way that he looks, but in the way that he acts. The acting, I've got to say, primarily with a father, but also to a degree with a mother, I've got to say I think their acting was quite weak, and almost comes across, like I said, they're doing the guy's doing like a Ned Flanders impersonation. It is bizarre. Like I said, the rest of the film I think doesn't suffer from that. And I think the acting for all of the other characters in the rest of the movie are fine, and I think it's particularly strong in the second section. But that first section, the two actors that play the two parents, and particularly the dad, weak, to the point where it's almost comedic with the dad. But the son the child actor, ironically, was probably the best one. The only other thing I would say outside of that is the final section. I have to say, the ending is maybe a little unsatisfying, and there were maybe a little bit of logic issues here. I don't want to give anything away, but it focuses on this couple that are related to the family from the first part of the movie, and we see them calling out to someone, and then they end up going looking for someone they're calling out to in the woods, and then inevitably get lost. But it surely would have made sense for them to go, follow my voice, come to me. But instead they don't. They venture into the woods following this other voice and end up getting lost, rather than calling this other voice to them, which surely would have been the smarter thing to do and pretty simple. And they don't do it at all in the movie ever, and end up getting kind of lost. And as I say, that particular section has a little bit of an unsatisfying ending, where I feel like you could have ended it in a certain way where I was sort of expecting it to end, to be honest, but nonetheless it's a little bit unsatisfying. You don't quite know the fate of one character, and it's kind of left up to an assumption and sort of feels a little bit abrupt. Overall though, I think the critiques I have, they don't take away from what is ultimately somewhat of an enjoyable found footage movie, and a well-made one that is, I think, somewhat accessible to non-found footage fans, because, as I say, there's not too much shaky cam. The quality of the filming is quite good. and I think the story is genuinely quite interesting with a few, like, as I say, a few issues that I've mentioned. So for me, this is a relatively strong film overall. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. What were your thoughts if you'd seen it? Please do let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.